Thank you very much. My name is Maureen White, and I have the privilege, I should say the pleasure and the privilege, of serving as chairman of the board of Refugees International. It's wonderful to see so many friends, partners, and champions of refugees' rights here with us tonight. We're here not only to celebrate, but to reaffirm our shared commitment to stand by people who've been forced to leave through no choice of their own, and to ensure that those people who have fled have their rights, their dignity, and their humanity protected. That commitment has never been more urgent. For me, it's truly an honor to work so closely with the extraordinary staff at Refugees International. They are the backbone of this organization, and their dedication, expertise, and relentless advocacy are what makes this work possible every single day. I'd like to take a moment and say a special thanks to Becca Meyerowitz, our incredible Vice President for Philanthropy. She is the maestro between tonight's gathering. Becca, thank you for bringing us all together and doing it so beautifully. Thank you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce someone who embodies the spirit of courageous advocacy that defines Refugees International, our president, Jeremy Konyndyk. Thank you, and enjoy the evening. Take this away.
Thank you so much, Maureen. And I also am told to remind you to eat your salads. There we go, thank you. All right, well, welcome everyone. I'm Jeremy Konyndyk. I'm the president of Refugees International, and we are so grateful to all of you for joining us here tonight for what is going to be a powerful evening of solidarity and hope at a time when I think it's easy to feel a lot of darkness. We have an incredible program for you this evening, and I'm going to take a few minutes to say a little bit about Refugees International and the importance of our mission at this moment. But first, I want to begin with a tribute to our former president, Lionel Rosenblatt, who sadly passed away a few weeks ago. Lionel was a lifelong advocate for refugees, dating back to his time as a young State Department official, when in the waning days of the Vietnam War, he defied the US Embassy, flew on his own dime to Saigon, and ran around Saigon unofficially and ducking the US Embassy that was trying to find him and chase him down, and spent a week evacuating hundreds of local Vietnamese embassy staff to safety before the city fell in 1975. It was classic Lionel. He believed deeply in doing the right thing, even when, sometimes especially when, it was unorthodox. As president of RI in the 1990s, he famously helped to sneak Richard Holbrooke into Sarajevo as it stood under siege, a moment that led to Holbrooke becoming special envoy and later brokering the Dayton Peace Accords to end that war, and also led to Holbrooke becoming the chair of our board. We carry Lionel's legacy forward every day, and we're proud to stand on the foundation that Lionel helped to build. We're joined today by his wife, Anne, and some of his friends from across his career, so please join me in appreciating them. And I'd like to now observe a moment of silence to recognize and honor the life that Lionel lived. Thank you so much. We will miss him. I want to also begin by thanking the lead sponsors who made tonight's event possible, Maureen White and Steve Ratner and Elizabeth Galvin, and all of the other sponsors whose generous support makes this evening possible. I also want to recognize our incredible board of directors and directors emeriti for their support, their wise stewardship, their passion for our mission. If you're able, please stand so that we can thank you. And a huge note of appreciation for our team, the Refugees International staff. Could all of you stand for a moment as well? Wonderful. We so appreciate these people who help to power our work. I also want to acknowledge someone who's not here tonight, but whose work is here, and that's Reem Youssef, a Syrian refugee artist whose work you see on our event materials and programs this evening. Her beautiful art is a profound reminder of the richness and talent that refugees and immigrants bring to the world, and very fittingly to see her art while we are here in the National Museum of Women in the Arts. And we are so grateful to the museum and the team here at the museum for hosting us in this beautiful space. It's a really lovely room. Now, we are here tonight at a very precarious moment for refugees and displaced people, both here in the world, or here in the US and around the world. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the Refugee Convention, and its core idea that people fleeing persecution deserve safety and dignity and rights is under profound attack today. The second Trump administration is proving to be the most anti-refugee administration in US history. They're dismantling asylum, refugee resettlement, and humanitarian parole programs. They're expelling protected people from the country. They're targeting and intimidating legally resettled refugees who are already here. And they have almost completely eliminated US aid funding for refugee support overseas. And that makes our mission as necessary as it has ever been. And we are standing up to defend refuge and displaced people on multiple fronts. Overseas, we are documenting abuses and atrocities from Sudan to Gaza to Myanmar and pushing governments and institutions to act. We are documenting the immense harm caused by President Trump and Elon Musk's assault on US aid and elevating the voices of those who've been affected by that on the front lines of crises. Here at home, we are fighting back against policies that aim to shred the United States' longstanding commitment to refuge and refugees. We are advancing pro-refugee policies at the state and local level, supporting litigation to defend refugees, exposing abuses by immigration authorities, and engaging and recruiting ordinary people who want to stand up and join the work at this time. As we'll hear later from Mayor Frey, the consequences of the administration's vitriol against refugees have very real effects on communities across this country, where refugees and allies like all of us are increasingly facing fear, retribution, and harm. But despite the many battles and the many political headwinds that we face, I find myself increasingly hopeful in this moment. Because we're also seeing something else. We are seeing a growing public backlash against the anti-refugee sentiment that has defined so much of our politics in recent years. As Minneapolis has shown, communities are stepping up to defend their neighbors. And there is rising opposition to atrocities and forced displacement in places like Gaza and Sudan, and a demand for renewed US moral leadership. In the past few months alone, we've had thousands of new people sign up with Refugees International looking to get involved in activism to support refugees. We're also witnessing profound leadership and innovation from refugee leaders themselves. We're currently recruiting our 4th class of refugee fellows, a group of dynamic activists who we work with on advocacy very, very closely. And in just this last year, some of our refugee fellows have spoken at the UN General Assembly, at the COP climate talks in Brazil, in Davos, have testified before Congress, written for the New York Times, and many more opportunities. And their extraordinary leadership really exemplifies the kind of hopeful future that we're trying to build. Before we continue with our program, I want to just also make sure everybody knows about something cool and something new, and that is a raffle that we are trying tonight. So our friends at the HBO show Last Week Tonight with John Oliver have graciously gifted us a package of 2 VIP audience tickets with a post-show meet and greet with John Oliver in New York. So there is a sign on your table with a QR code you can scan to purchase a raffle ticket, or as many tickets as you want, throughout the evening, and we will pick a winner later tonight and contact them by email. John's team has worked with us at Refugees International over the last year on several really powerful segments on the famine in Gaza, on the 1 year mark of the destruction of U.S. aid. And so we're really grateful both for that work and for them supporting us with this donation of this raffle item. Now, before I introduce Natasha Hall, who is our senior advocate for the Middle East, to present the Richard C. Holbrooke Award, I also want to give a shout out to Kati Martone, Richard's wife and longtime friend and former board member of Refugees International, who isn't able to join us tonight because she is hard at work on yet another amazing book, but she is with us in spirit. So now please join me in welcoming Natasha to the stage. Natasha.
Thank you, Jeremy, and good evening, everyone. Now, each year, Refugees International gives the Richard C. Holbrooke Award to a member of local civil society who has demonstrated courage and commitment to assisting displaced people. The award is given in memory of Mr. Holbrooke, who served as chairman of the board of Refugees International until he left to become chief negotiator of the Dayton Accords, which ended the war in Bosnia. Richard Holbrooke himself was the son of refugees who fled Nazi Germany and a lifelong advocate for displaced people. He worked tirelessly to shore up support in Washington and around the world for people seeking safety. His leadership provides an important lesson for our current moment, highlighting what's possible when there is political will to act. He spent time, including with Refugees International, traveling to speak directly with displaced people, to understand their challenges and aspirations, and to bring back that responsibility to Washington to make the world a better place. We know that he would have been inspired by this year's Holbrooke awardee, Dr. Thaer Ahmad, accepting the award on behalf of Palestinian medical workers in Gaza. Dr. Thaer is a Palestinian-American doctor and a humanitarian who has provided medical relief in some of the world's most devastated conflict zones, including Gaza. Dr. Thaer has completed 5 medical missions to Gaza and most recently spent a month working with the Palestinian Red Crescent in El Khalil, Hebron. He has since been denied entry into Gaza by Israeli authorities on 4 separate occasions, citing his Palestinian heritage and advocacy work on behalf of the people of Gaza in the United States and before the EU and the UN. Dr. Thaer's story from emergency rooms in Gaza to his journey as an advocate is detailed in the documentary American Doctor, which was shown at Sundance and is coming to DC in June. So stay tuned for more details on that. Alongside the award, Refugees International will be giving a donation of $5,000 to the Palestinian American Medical Association. And we're honored to have Rama and Alia here tonight from PAMA. Please stand. So congratulations, Dr. Thaer and PAMA, and thank you for the remarkable work that you have done to save lives and advocate for Palestinians.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, please. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Appreciate you. Thank you. Please sit down, please. Thank you. Thank you. I'm grateful to be here, and I'm incredibly appreciative to participate in an event where we can acknowledge the Palestinian healthcare workers. As a Western educated, and practicing medical doctor here in the States, I have to admit, I do feel a degree of shame in our collective silence, at our inability to stand up for our colleagues in Palestine and in Lebanon and in other places where hospitals and healthcare workers are being targeted and attacked. And I am beyond thankful that Refugees International is a place where we can speak about these things, where we can acknowledge their service, where we can remember those who have fallen, and where we can continue to advocate for their protections. You know, oftentimes, the physicians or nurses working in Gaza and in Palestine, they're the subject of some dehumanizing rhetoric. We're made to believe that they're rounding in the hospital wards during the day, and then at night they transform into these nefarious characters, these supervillains. And I'm here today to tell all of you in this room that it is true they are not just doctors. They are not just nurses. They're much, much more than that. They are pillars of their communities. When they get up every single day and they put on their scrubs and their white coats and they're walking to these hospitals as fighter jets are roaming ahead and tanks are rolling through the neighborhoods, the people see them walking and they find the motivation to continue to live and to survive. You know, perhaps the only way I can drive this home is to just mention a few of them very briefly. I want to first mention Dr. Nahid, who was the chair of Nasser Hospital while I was working there in early 2024. A brilliant surgeon. As the Israelis surrounded the hospital, and we were sitting in our rooms, putting up our mattresses against the windows, hoping that the shrapnel wouldn't fly through and kill us, I remember Dr. Nahid knocked on my door, and he said, "Don't worry, Thair, everything will be fine. Do not worry." And in the next morning, when I was evacuated to another hospital because Nasser Hospital had become a ghost town, I walked out past Dr. Nahid and he shook my hand and he said, "I just want to thank you for coming." And he stayed in the hospital until the Israeli forces raided that hospital, abducted him, and he's still behind bars today. I want to talk about Umar and Ahmad, the two paramedics who were dispatched to rescue Hind. They were at Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital sitting with Ismail Ghul, who was a famous journalist who was also killed. And they got the call that there was a little girl in a car who needed their help. Without question, without hesitation, they jumped into their Palestinian Red Crescent ambulance and they drove towards Hind. And as they approached, more than 50 meters away, an Israeli missile struck their ambulance, killing both of them. And we know what happened to Hind after that. I want to talk about Dr. Khalid Assur, who also was at Nasser Hospital with me. A brilliant young surgeon who was just starting his career. He was abducted at that time, and he was released 6 months later. And do you know what he did after he was released? The very next day, he showed up to the hospital to treat his patients. And then he got engaged, and he started to, move on with the rest of his life. But that sort of symbol, everybody in Gaza was looking at that. This doctor, 6 months in Israeli dungeons, released, and now practicing medicine again. And I do want to mention Nurse Shadi, and he's okay with me telling this story, but while we were in the emergency room of Nasser Hospital and there was this downtime, I remember talking to him and asking, what's your background like? Are you married? Do you have any kids? He said, "I have a 2-year-old, and my wife is 2 months pregnant." And he saw me start doing the math in my head, like, 2 months pregnant, this has been going on for about 4 months. And he goes, "Don't worry, the child was consummated during the 5-day ceasefire in November." So 1,700 of these healthcare workers have served, and while they were serving, they lost their lives. 6 of them were killed in detention. 83 were abducted while they were in the hospital. And almost 500 since October 7th have been arrested and released. But they continue to serve under bombardment, without the supplies that they need, without the medicine that they would like to prescribe for their patients, without the salary that they need to make a living and make ends meet, and all while their communities and families are subjected to displacement and genocide. But they still show up every single day. Not a single hospital was left untouched in Gaza. At one point or another, all of them became surrounded. But those doctors and those nurses, if they were on duty, they did not leave those hospitals. They stayed treating their patients. So I thank you all for coming here tonight. I thank you for allowing this space, allowing me to share this with all of you. And I cannot wait to share with my colleagues back in Gaza that we spoke about them this evening, that we talked about their service, we talked about their commitment, and that we're remembering them. And even though they may be out of the headlines, that they are not forgotten, not by any of us. So thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Rajai Batniji, and I'm proud to serve on the board of Refugees International. I'm also a physician whose family is from Gaza, and so this conversation tonight has very, very special meaning to me. I want to start by thanking you, Natasha, for being here, and Thea for being here. You know, I think we owe a moral debt to all the physicians who have served to preserve and protect life throughout Israel's genocide in Gaza. And, you know, I think that is a debt we may never repay, especially to those that you mentioned who sacrificed their lives, those who were held hostage and remain detained today. I'll hold it a little closer, thank you. And so I want to start with you, Thad. You know, you've been to Gaza several times now in the last 3 years. And you've worked as an emergency physician at hospitals under dangerous conditions. I hear about it from my family members who work at those same hospitals. Can you tell all of us, you know, when you reflect on those visits that you had, what are the memories that stay most vividly with you?
I mean, it's a tough thing to talk about, to be honest with you, because it's a mixed bag of emotions. You know, it's tough to be working in an emergency department and not be able to fulfill the standards of care for the patients that you're treating. You know, you hear a bomb go off, and then you feel that bomb, you feel the pressure of it kind of hit you in the chest. And 10 or 15 minutes later, you just get a massive amount of people, 10, 15, 20 people. Some of them are laid down on the ground in front of you, and you're forced to try to pick who you start with, who you start assessing. And it's just this feeling of oppression, to be frank with you. You know, I'm a physician trying to do my job, and I swear if you let me do my job, some of these people we can actually save. And to think that there are so many external forces working against these people who are in front of you, it really makes you quite frustrated. But the other thing is I have to bring it back to the healthcare workers. You know, even in these moments of an incredible amount of stress, they still maintained a sense of humor. They still maintained this steadfastness in preserving the dignity of others. I mean, I will never forget that we were running out of all of these supplies. And if anybody became exposed in the emergency department, they came in and there was some degree of exposure of their body. These healthcare workers are making sure that they took the time to cover them up, so that people could still kind of hang on to that dignity. And when they're talking to people, and you know this very well, but when you're talking to someone, it's not sir, it's my uncle, my aunt, my father, my mother, my grandparent, even if they're not related, because that's sort of how that community stayed together. Just acknowledging that I have a responsibility to this person, and I'm gonna treat them how I would treat my family members. It made me a better doctor here, to be honest with you.
Bring that same level of respect home with you. Natasha, I want to turn to you. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion recently of the ceasefire in Gaza, and you know, I'd love to hear from you. You know, what's actually happening? And I know you recently led a major initiative on this and a scorecard around the ceasefire. But what's actually happening in terms of, you know, stopping bombardment, access to humanitarian assistance, the opening of the border crossings, the commitments that were made. Can you tell us a little bit about how it's playing out and what we're all observing?
Yeah, thank you for that question, and thank you for that answer, Thad. I mean, I don't think that we can call this a ceasefire in any meaningful sense of that word. Even if we just look at the word ceasefire, right? Not the agreement behind it, but just that word. Over 800 Palestinians have been killed since that ceasefire was announced. Thousands more have been severely wounded. And you know, that doesn't even give us a snapshot of the kind of suffering that we're really seeing in Gaza today, because what we're seeing is a more insidious form of suffering that is happening. It's not visible in the headlines, but it is no less lethal. And that really starts with the aid that we have been trying to calculate over time. And what we've calculated is that there's about 100 UN-coordinated trucks that have gone in per day into Gaza. Now, I don't like trucks as a metric at all, but just to give you a point of comparison, The ceasefire, the temporary ceasefire that happened early last year, was 6 times that amount. So this is hardly a ceasefire leading to everlasting peace. On top of that, most of the border crossings are closed. The biggest border crossing, like Rafah, has been closed for all aid and commercial cargo. The ones that are open are inconsistently open. And with this regional escalation that's just happened, Israel shut down all of the border crossings, provoking renewed fears of famine. And on top of all of that, Palestinians in Gaza don't have access to nearly 60% of their own territory, meaning they don't have access to their homes, their farmland, infrastructure that they need to survive. So basically, all of these things are either completely destroyed or they're inaccessible. And so what does that mean in human terms? Well, Thad has spoken about some of that. But it means that most Palestinians in Gaza are living in makeshift shelters that are not impervious to the elements. They are living amongst open sewage and defecation and rats and infestation that's leading to rampant skin infections and waterborne diseases. I talk to parents that are terrified that rats are going to attack their babies in the night. And rightfully so, because it's happened, and it's going to happen with increasing frequency as we approach the summer months. I mean, I've been speaking to a retired doctor in Gaza. He considers himself lucky because he can rent out a bombed-out room in an apartment complex, which is extremely dangerous, obviously, but it elevates his family away from some of that infestation that I was talking about. And, Thad, we were talking about some of these issues with, the medical facilities. I mean, just to put some figures onto that, there are still no fully functioning hospitals in Gaza today. Half of the medical facilities are non-operational. Half of essential medicines are non-existent, out of stock. So I've had doctors ask me for scales for cancer patients. They've given up on the chemotherapy drugs. They just want scales to measure the wasting of their patients. I mean, that's essentially what we're doing. We're measuring the wasting of an entire population. I'm honestly reminded of what the Israeli Minister of Defense said at the outset of this conflict, and he said that we're fighting human animals. And whatever you thought of his intentions behind those words at the time, I mean, frankly, for me, it's hard to look at what's going on in Gaza today and not see every man, woman, and child being treated like an animal. And that's not a ceasefire, frankly, that's leading to everlasting peace, not in Gaza and not anywhere else.
Incredibly troubling. Thank you, Natasha, for bringing a spotlight on that and for the report that you also did to bring clarity to what's happening. Dr. Ahmad, I want to turn to you. You talked about, Dr. Nahed, you talked about others who have been abducted and continue to be held hostage, physicians who are abducted and continue to be held hostage. And we've seen images, I think most visibly, of Dr. Abu Safia walking in his white coat towards an Israeli tank. Can you tell us, what do we know about the physicians and nurses and other healthcare workers who continue to be held in detention by Israel? What are the conditions for them? What does this mean for the healthcare system that continues to operate?
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. I mean, and bringing up Dr. Hussam Abu Safia. Dr. Hussam today had a court trial, and he appeared in front of an Israeli military court, and the decision was made to extend his detention for 6 more months at least. No charges have been filed against him, and there is nobody that has been able to even mount a defense. No lawyer, whether it's the Physicians for Human Rights Israel or any of these other human rights organizations, have been able to even defend him appropriately. He has not been able to speak to his family. And you mentioned Dr. Hussam's iconic image as he emerged from Kamal Adwan Hospital, which is the only pediatric hospital in the north of Gaza. And he really tried to avoid that hospital shutting down. I mean, he spent weeks there trying to hold off the Israeli military from raiding and rendering that hospital defunct. And I think there's a couple of things I want to mention about him and then just the other healthcare workers as well. The first is this guy is a pediatrician who is a dual citizen, who studied in Uzbekistan and got his medical degree from there and married somebody from Uzbekistan. So throughout the time in Gaza, he had the opportunity to evacuate and leave. And even when they were forcing people south, he stayed in the north of Gaza as famine-like conditions were met. His son, his oldest son, Ibrahim, was killed in the compound of the hospital while he was inside in the ICU. He was killed by a drone. He wrote 2 op-eds for the New York Times. And then because he became so visible, such a symbol of resilience and steadfastness, and his existence, his pure existence in the hospital was a threat to the operations, he had to be abducted. And he's going to remain, he's going to be one of the last people that remain in Israeli prisons because of his outspokenness and his advocacy. And he's one of over 80 healthcare workers in Israeli prisons currently, none of whom have been tried, none of whom have had any sort of crime. They're all under these administrative detentions that you can just extend indefinitely. And in fact, 6 of them have died in Israeli prisons because of the conditions, because of the treatment that's there. Almost all of them have contracted scabies. It just gives you an idea of just how filthy these dungeons are. And the other thing that I'll mention about this, with respect to the healthcare workers that have been abducted and are currently being held, is that there are around 18 healthcare workers, physicians specifically, who are the only specialists of their kind in the Gaza Strip. So when I was talking about pillars of these medical communities, these are senior doctors who should be training the next generation of Gaza's physicians. They should be leading the recovery and the response. They should be in these hospitals right now as we're dealing with this quote-unquote fake ceasefire. And instead, they're languishing away behind these prisons. And how can we ask them, when they're released, how can we ask them to get back to work? Do we expect them to just be able to turn the switch on and suddenly be these providers that can work these full shifts? I mean, there is a mental health crisis across all of Gaza. But amongst healthcare workers, taking away that security and that safety from them, it's going to have a profound impact, not just on them in their profession, but on all of the professionals in Gaza. And it's something I worry about, to be frank with you.
I appreciate that. Natasha, turning back to you, I mean, part of the reason I think we're all here is we recognize what a special organization Refugees International is. I'm incredibly proud to be on the board here. And I think RI plays a very unique role in moments like this. Can you talk to us about what that role looks like right now, and where do you see opportunities for advocacy on Gaza, and what lies ahead for RI in this space?
Yeah, well, I'm a bit of a newbie. I started at RI in October, so the announcement of this so-called ceasefire. And it was an interesting time to start because the humanitarian community and even the advocacy community, I would say, was kind of in a holding pattern. They wanted to see, would this ceasefire actually be implemented? Would anything happen? Would conditions improve? NGOs were terrified because most of them had been effectively deregistered by the Israeli government. We're talking about the major international NGOs like Save the Children and Oxfam. And this is where Refugees International really shines, though. Without the operational constraints of having to worry about what the Israeli government is going to do to our operations on the ground, without donor constraints, frankly, about our own advocacy, we could lead the charge effectively. And so we started with statements that were, calling attention to the ongoing famine and hunger crisis in Gaza, even after the ceasefire. We talked about the deregistration of dozens of NGOs and what that would potentially do. And that even pierced Israeli media during the holiday season, right? But I think all of this came to really a culmination, I think, for me and many others, just a couple of weeks ago, when we released a scorecard. It was the second scorecard that Refugees International has released on this crisis, essentially measuring the ceasefire against its own benchmarks, failing, of course, after our conversation in terms of civilian protection, humanitarian access, forced displacement, et cetera. And we really had to make our own reign here, right? Because as you've probably noticed, there's a lot going on in DC and the rest of the world. But we were able to do that. And most importantly, we were able to bring voices from Gaza to the international press community and also the press community in DC. and really call attention to that. But at the same time, we were using the awareness and the analysis that we used to do the scorecard to actually apply political pressure. So at the end of that advocacy campaign week, we wrote a letter for any constituent to be able to sign and send to their representatives, for them to ask their representatives, what are you doing about this? How are you voting on certain pieces of legislation? Namely, a couple of joint resolutions of disapproval, and this is where I'll end. But just a couple of weeks ago, in case you didn't notice this happening, a couple of joint resolutions of disapproval were in the Senate on transfers of arms and bulldozers to Israel. Now, 80% of Democratic senators voted yes on that. That is a huge shift. And just to give you a point of comparison, in January 2024, there was a resolution just to report on human rights violations, and that got 11 senator votes, okay? So we are witnessing a tectonic shift, finally, in American politics, and Refugees International is gonna be at the forefront of that. We are gonna continue to apply that kind of pressure and increase awareness about what's going on, because the reality is a lot of what's going on in Palestine today is because of our tax dollars, right? So a lot of that advocacy has to come from DC, but we're not just gonna keep it in DC. We're gonna put the pressure on, we're gonna go to New York, we're gonna talk to member states at the UN and demand accountability for this so-called ceasefire. So more to see there, hopefully, too.
Thank you, Natasha. So thank you both, Natasha and Dr. Ahmad, for your insights, your commitment. We're going to take a brief break for dinner and then reconvene shortly after the meal for the next part of our program.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening. My name is Kate Brick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Refugee Advocacy Lab, which is a partnered initiative housed at Refugees International and co-led with Church World Service, the International Refugee Assistance Project, and Refugee Congress. And our work and our mission is to really take Refugees International's work to the local level here in the United States, where we have seen and we know there's actually a lot of opportunity to do real things that affect real people. The lab works on the ground with partners in 10 states, and one of them is Minnesota, where our next honoree is from, and is doing truly extraordinary work to stand up for refugees and immigrants and the entire community under siege under federal attacks. Each year, Refugees International gives the McCall-Pierpaoli Humanitarian Award to individuals who have made significant contributions to advance the rights and safety of displaced people. The award itself is named for David and Penny McCall and Yvette Pierpaoli, dedicated humanitarians who died tragically during a Refugees International research trip in 1999. It's a sober reminder that this work requires courage and can come at a very high price. We know that all too well from events across the country this year, including the tragic killing of people in Minneapolis who were standing by their immigrant and refugee neighbors. In the face of this tragedy, Mayor Jacob Frey has shown that courage. While others have backed away, fearful of what might happen and the retribution that might come their way if they're protecting immigrants and refugees, Mayor Frey has stood strong, building on his city's legacy of welcoming newcomers and sending a clear message to Washington, to people in Minneapolis, and to the country that what unites us is our humanity and how we protect one another. As the LAG's local partner in Minneapolis said, the Center for Victims of Torture, Minnesota needed leaders during the violence and chaos of Operation Metro Surge, and Mayor Frey stood up and was heard around the world. In that spirit, we are proud to offer the 2026 McCall-Pierpaoli Award to Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey.
I might go a little off script. Thank you, Kate and Refugees International, truly. I found it particularly important that on this day, with so many people in the room that care so deeply about humanity, the people that are honored are an incredible Palestinian American in Dr. Thayer Ahmad, and myself, an American Jew. And what that tells us is that what happens here, whether in Minneapolis or Chicago or Washington, D.C., or Gaza, is that there is so much more that unites us than divides us. Even amongst differences, that we can find peace, that we can find not just ways to live amongst each other, but also love one another. And that's what happened in such a beautiful and important way in Minneapolis. But for anything else, I really want to thank the people of Minneapolis, because this moment does belong to them. The tens of thousands of people that stood up and were peacefully protesting, the thousands that were dropping off food for those that were otherwise terrified to go outside, hockey moms that were standing watch outside of a daycare to make sure that the people that they love, the families that are part of the fabric that makes Minneapolis a better place, were protected. And what we saw in those moments, in those neighbors, from small business owners and first responders that were going block by block, home by home, community leaders and volunteers that were stepping up and checking on their neighbors and opening their doors when it counted most. And I think about those people that didn't ask whose responsibility it was, but just assumed it's my responsibility. They said, it's my responsibility to stand up for these people that I love. And importantly, in Minneapolis, we don't look at people in our city as refugees or even immigrants. They're just part of our family. They're our banker. They're our babysitter. They're my security detail. They're my insurance agent. They're the place where I go and get some coffee in the morning, and they're the people that have, for decades, made Minneapolis a better place. They're more Minneapolis than I am. And it's that same spirit that I see in how we welcome our immigrant community and our refugee neighbors, people who have endured the unimaginable, who arrive here carrying both loss but also hope, and who in turn strengthen the very heart of who our city and, importantly, what we can be. They start businesses, they fill our classrooms, they bring energy, hope, and inspiring us to believe what is possible. And just as importantly, I see how Minneapolis really shows up for them too. It's neighbors that are offering people a ride. It's city staff that were stepping up to make sure that a family understood the options that were before them. Teachers that were translating for their students, and community organizers and organizations that were doing this quiet and relentless work of providing mutual aid during some of the most terrifying of circumstances. And by the way, circumstances were terrifying. And I'll talk about this in a moment, but what you saw on the news and on the TV, it was worse. And what you saw from Minneapolis residents and people stepping up, it was even better. Some would like to define America as a nation that is made possible by the people that we keep out. I think you all know America is made possible by the people that we invite in. What they've forgotten, those that are saying that, is the ethos and this promise of America where patriotism is found in acts of courage and compassion, and where the endurance of a great nation is not only dependent on those who fight for it, but also those who question it, who debate fiercely and love unabashedly, who support the ideals of America no matter who benefits from those ideals or those constitutional lines. Values we show in Minneapolis, where no one builds a life alone, we build it together. We build it block by block, classroom by classroom, neighbor by neighbor. So while I'm really deeply honored and really touched to get this award, I know it doesn't belong to just me. It belongs to the 435,000 people that call Minneapolis home, the many more that come and go, the people that were standing out in like negative 10-degree temperatures. By the way, it's really beautiful right now. You should come. Spend all your money. We would love to have you. Those that were weathering for days the most difficult of circumstances, and for those, obviously, that chose love over hate, who leaned in when it would have been a whole lot easier to step aside. For those who believe that at the core of this country is strongest when everybody's got a place in it. And so Minneapolis has been tested these past few months. We faced hardship. We faced a whole lot of uncertainty. But through it all, we showed something that is far more powerful than just resistance. This was not just about resistance. It was about something more profound and critical, which is love. And that's what this award reflects. It's not just policy, but it's people. It's a community that cares more about who you are than where you're from or the zip code where you were born. So to everyone back home in Minneapolis, this is yours. And to those who have come to our city for a fresh start, and to those that are still to come, thank you for choosing us. You will always be met with open arms. You have a family in our country. You have a family in our city. We love you dearly. Thank you so much.
All right, we're here to bring it home. Hi, everybody. My name is Mohammed Naeem. I am Refugees International Senior Director for Advocacy Strategy. What a brilliant first conversation we had earlier today, and another in store for you now. So I would love to first turn to Mayor Frey. It is such an honor for me to have this conversation with you, Mayor Frey and Kate, two leaders that I admire tremendously. You showed profound public leadership during those few months in Minneapolis and really across your tenure as mayor. And Minneapolis found itself at the collision of two specific policies that the administration had enacted. One was Operation Metro Surge, this massive escalation of federal enforcement to round up immigrants across the city, but also something that received far less attention, which was that ICE and CBP and the federal government began detaining resettled refugees and sent them to detention facilities in Texas. Being that those two policies collided in your city, what did you feel was needed in your response and the city's response writ large to show that the city of Minneapolis was going to stand up against what was an egregious overreach by the federal government?
What we saw in Minneapolis, never in a million years would I have said this could have taken place in America. I was so wrong. To your point, we had 3,000 to 4,000 ICE agents and Border Patrol in our city. And that would be a whole lot in New York City. In a city of 435,000, in a city with 600 police officers, 3,000 to 4,000 ICE agents and Border Patrol is overwhelming. And it wasn't just the numbers. They were marching down the street, dozens of them, hundreds of them, discriminating only on the basis of, do you look like you're Somali or Latino or Southeast Asian, and then indiscriminate pickups thereafter. They picked up American citizens. They picked up American Indians. And if that weren't so horrific, it would be comical. They picked up people that were lawfully settled here as refugees who had full legal right to be in this country. And they did so with no regard whatsoever for the Constitution. And we had to stand up for our community. People throughout our city stood up for those that were terrified to go outside. And, you know, I mean, I think a big part of what we had to show was not just the legal perspective, that they are here legally. We have a separation ordinance which prohibits us from cooperating on the enforcement of immigration law, but it's also the how. This is really important. When you stand up for people, especially now, we got to focus on the how. Not just the policy, not just kind of the nerdy high-level stuff that we talk about and are important to us and would resonate in this room, but we got to make it resonate across the country. How do you make it resonate across the country? You focus on the pregnant woman that was getting dragged through the snow. Nobody wants to see that. They think about their sister, their wife, themselves. Nobody wants to see a 6-year-old boy getting torn away from their family. I think about my 5-year-old. This is not an ideological thing. This is a human being thing. And so when we stand up, when we do something about it, you think about human beings, not just laws. And so much of what we were trying to focus on was not just convincing a Minneapolis population, which was already totally convinced that what was happening was disgusting. It was about changing a political narrative, which, by the way, is why they left. They didn't left because they were doing the wrong. They left because the political narrative was so devastating that they had to.
So that's a really wonderful segue to Kate. Kate, the work of the Refugee Advocacy Lab is to advance inclusive policies at the state and local level. Looking at Minnesota, what are some of the positive opportunities for progress that we're seeing across the state, as well as across the country?
Yeah, you know, it's first of all, Mayor Frey, I just appreciate your leadership so much. And I think that what you have shown in Minneapolis, it's sad that it was necessary, but it was incredibly inspiring to cities around the country where they don't want that to happen, where it had been happening in other places like LA and Chicago. And the height that it reached in Minneapolis really made it so we couldn't turn away. But what we're facing right now, it's interesting if you look back at the first Trump administration, which obviously looks mild compared to the circumstances now. But even then, state and local leaders like you know and feel the myriad wonderful benefits that come from welcoming refugees and immigrants. You feel it in the social fabric of your community, you feel it in the local economy, and all of the different people that you mentioned who you interface with and everybody interfaces with on a day-to-day basis. And they knew, as they know now, that the vitriol that we were hearing in Washington and the retroactive policies we had then, even the first time around, weren't reflective of what was in the best interest of their communities. And so what we started to see increasingly during the first administration was localities like Minneapolis and cities all over the country and state legislatures thinking about what they could do to tangibly make their city or their state more welcoming, not only because it was the right thing to do, but because it made their city stronger and more vibrant and more economically successful. And so we saw this uptick of state legislation and cities creating offices to welcome newcomers that showed real benefits to those places. So fast forward to now, what we're seeing is so much more dire and also is so much more tangible. To your point, people for whom this issue felt totally political, they would read about it, it wasn't relevant to them, it has become relevant. Even if they don't live in a city like Minneapolis or Chicago or LA or many of the cities we work with in Ohio, they're seeing it now, and they're seeing those stories and those people impacted, and they're feeling it. And so I think we're seeing that resolve now in a way that's even stronger than before. And so Yes, there are a bunch of horrible bills that are being introduced across the country because there are people who feel very emboldened by this administration, but those bills aren't passing. And I want to share, looking at Minneapolis, if we zoom out to the state level in Minnesota, the governor just created a council that is going to investigate and document all of these ICE abuses that Mayor Frey talked about. And that's happening in other places too. And from a state legislative standpoint, we work in Virginia, and I want to give a huge shout out to Church Will Service and our Virginia team in the back, who spent months this year and successfully championed 14 pieces of legislation that are not only pushing back against local law enforcement cooperating with ICE, which they did, and it passed, but they're also thinking about what are all the other things that we can do in our state, in our communities, to make it better for people, despite the current environment that we're in. And so they passed a bill that's going to use state funding to now supplement what used to be federal funding for SNAP and for food stamps and for benefits that are critical to people living, let alone being successful, that was always accessible to refugees and other humanitarian populations and now isn't. That state and many other states are choosing to use their own funding because they know when their populations thrive, we all thrive, and that bill passed too. There were a bunch of other bills that were passing in Virginia, and you could say, yes, Virginia had a pretty significant shift politically over the last year, and these bills are possible. But I also want to point to Georgia, where the lab has been working for the last 5 years. And we just passed a bill in Georgia that allows doctors who are trained abroad to actually be able to practice in this state and makes it so much easier for healthcare workers who we all need. There are huge shortages in healthcare workers across the country, and especially in Georgia, and they were facing these ridiculous barriers that didn't make any sense to get relicensed. That bill passed with a Republican sponsor. And in addition to that, there were several bills that passed, several bills that were defeated that were anti-immigrant bills that normally you would assume would kind of sail through a Georgia legislature, and they didn't. And they didn't because the business community came together with the advocates, with the faith groups, and they made a really, really strong case to their elected leaders on both sides of the aisle why these bills are detrimental to our cities and our state, and that those bills failed. So I think that there is a wave that we're seeing, and it's in Minneapolis, it's in Minnesota, and it's in other places the lab works, like Iowa and Kentucky and Wisconsin. And what I would say is at the crux of that is the stories and making it tangible and working with people who are not necessarily from the typical advocacy community, but who can make a case for why these policies will impact them for the better.
That's an excellent recap there. What strikes me is that it can feel incremental at the state level, but when you expand out at the national level, these are significant gains that really shifts the political narrative across other states. So thank you for that, Kate. So Mayor Frey, my final question to you, although I wish I had more time. I'm going to go slightly off script here, partly because of what you shared in your opening sort of response. At the height of what was happening in Minneapolis, my mother receives a lot of her news via TikTok. So she was watching you on TikTok, and she was watching what was happening in Minneapolis. And my mother called me one day, and she asked whether she should carry her green card. And she lives in New York City. And so it's that level of fear that gripped immigrant mothers all across the United States, but they were watching what was happening in Minneapolis. During those days, as you were enduring through what were really, really hard days, what were some lessons that you learned?
I'm so sorry to your mom that is a sensation that she felt where she had to carry a green card around when she's here completely lawfully. She makes the country a better place.
I only recall that memory because upstairs you and I had talked about folks in Minneapolis carrying around their passports.
Well, we did, and that, honestly, it's something that I could never bring myself to recommend.
Yeah.
And perhaps that was a failure on my part, because I was asked repeatedly by mainly Somali women, but Latino women, that should we be carrying around our passports?
Yeah.
And I didn't say yes in some cases and in retrospect, I kind of regret it, but at the same time, I couldn't bring myself to think that that was where we are.
Yeah.
I don't even remember what your question was right now.
No. Like the question wasn't about the green cards and passports. It was just about my mother saw you and your leadership exemplified on her screens. As you were navigating those days, what were some lessons?
Yeah. Oh, that's right. That's right. There were a ton of lessons. I mean, look, I've for better or for worse, I'm really good at handling crisis at this point. You know, we've been through it. 2020, George Floyd's murder, Annunciation, a shooting. And then, of course, Operation Metro Surge. Right. And look, I am not the same mayor that I was back when I got elected. I'm not the same person. And you learn lessons that make you a better leader, a better human being, and you use those lessons like every single day, including during Operation Metro Surge. And one of the big lessons that we've learned that I've been telling mayors and people from around the country is first, have an emergency management plan. I'm not going to get too deep into what that means, the acronyms like NIMS that Kate knows very well that are associated with how you conduct these things, because you guys would be asleep. But it matters because if you don't have those proper chains of communication, and if you don't know what your responsibility is and what it's not, the whole system shuts down. This emergency management plan allowed us to coordinate with mutual aid groups. It allowed us to have disseminate information to people that would otherwise be suffering, and also to get information back in that would better help us get food to somebody who is in need, or provide safety, or just respond to a 911 call. And so that was of critical importance. The second thing that I tell people that have not been through this yet is to be really honest and upfront and frank from the beginning. Yeah. A lot of people say, well, you must have had like these horrible, difficult decisions, you know? The truth is that most of these decisions were not horrible, difficult decisions. They were painful ones. It was really clear what the right thing was to do. It was really clear what the moral thing was to do. It was that it's painful because, you know, the Department of Justice is coming after you and is going to investigate you, and I've got a family. It was painful because, you know, you realize that there are people on the streets that are suffering now, and you want to help them, and you're trying to prevent the invocation of the Insurrection Act. And so this fence that you're riding the whole way is not like a fence between good and bad. You're on the good side. But you don't know what this federal administration is going to do. And so the goal here, just in conclusion, was not just to get ICE and Border Patrol to leave Minneapolis and then go to somewhere else to do the same harms and horrific acts and killings. The goal was to stop them in their tracks, to provide an example for others to follow, and to prevent this kind of thing from happening, because this can't happen in America.
That's, amidst that level of uncertainty, that's just some profound leadership, and such steady leadership. You not only inspired folks from your own town, but I know folks from really all over the country. So thank you for your leadership and for your courage and for your grace. Kate, we watched citizens in Minneapolis stand up for their city, for their neighbors, for their communities. What can folks in this room do to contribute to what hopefully becomes a country and a society that is more inclusive and welcoming of immigrants and refugees and all those who are forcibly displaced?
Thanks, yeah, and it's hard but good to ask that question in Washington, D.C., where we are at the epicenter of everything feeling really difficult and hard to change. But with that said, whether you live in Washington, D.C., whether you live in Northern Virginia or other parts of Virginia or Maryland, there is so much that we can do to make sure that our local communities are standing up for immigrants and refugees, and that we're seeing the kind of leadership that we have seen with Mayor Frey. So if you're in Virginia, all of those bills that I just mentioned, most of them have not actually been signed yet by Governor Spanberger. And she was introducing some amendments that honestly weren't great. So if you live in Virginia, please write to Governor Spanberger and let her know you think that all those bills that the legislature passed should be enacted exactly how they were written. If you live in other parts of the country or not in the DMV area, check out and see if your city has a welcoming resolution, which is just a resolution that says our city values and wants to continue welcoming immigrants and refugees. Look up your state legislature and see, does your state legislature prevent local law enforcement from working with ICE, or do they actually require it? And if it's the latter, look up who your representative is in the state legislature and let them know how you feel about that, and that is not the right thing to do. Last thing I would say is that on June 20th is World Refugee Day, and we are going to be celebrating refugees all across the country. There are so many opportunities to engage, and that's what the lab is here for, is to support that advocacy at the local level, to give folks the tools that they need, the connections that they need to be able to make their voice heard and matter. So reach out, and we're here to help. But even though this room is in DC and we're in a very, very difficult time, there is work that can be done. There are achievements that can be made. Mayor Frey is a testament to that. And so I would leave us with that note of positivity, hopefully.
All right. Well, put your hands together for Mayor Jacob Frey and Kate Frick. Thank you so much. And now, pass to our board member, Liz. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Mayor Frey, Kate, and Mohammed, for your wonderful and inspiring reflections. May we please have another round of applause for both of our esteemed honorees, Dr. Ahmad and Mayor Frey. My name is Liz Stern, and I am proud to serve on the board of Refugees International. It has been such an honor and a privilege to be here with you all tonight. Thank you again to my board colleagues for making this evening possible. We are all thankful to each and every one of you for the role you play in creating a more welcoming world for people seeking refuge. Refugees International places our humanity at the forefront of all the work we do and recognizes the unique value and worth of every single person. I am grateful to all of you in the room for the many ways that you support us in that work. We are most appreciative to have you in our community, and we hope that you will stick with us for many years to come. Before I invite you to join us in the reception area for dessert and an opportunity to continue mingling, I hope you'll consider making a gift to support Refugees International's work. And don't forget to buy your raffle tickets for the John Oliver show. We'll announce a winner later this evening. There is a very long road ahead to realizing our vision for rights and refuge for all. I'd like to ask that you consider how you can play a role in that long-term fight, whether it's becoming a monthly contributor to Refugees International or adding Refugees International as a part of your planned giving. Enhance your legacy and ensure our critical work continues for years to come. Please be sure to take one of the postcards on your table with you, and be sure to scan the QR code to learn more about our future events during June and celebrate World Refugee Day with us. Thank you all, and have a great day. Great evening. Thank you.